quickly with the guests that we have here today. So good afternoon, special dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen. And as you already heard, welcome to the beautiful Courtyard Marriott Mississauga Meadowvale for the keynote address of Andrew Scheer, Leader of the Opposition and the Conservative Party of Canada, which is obviously hosted by the Mississauga Board of Trade and sponsored by Fielding Environmental. Now, I've got the great pleasure of introducing some of our great guests at our head table. To start off, of course, our guest of honor and the keynote speaker for today, the Honorable Andrew Scheer, the Leader of the Opposition and Leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Her Worship, our Mayor Bonnie Crombie. Let me try to do this. From MBOT, President and CEO, David Wojcik. Representing our event sponsor, Fielding Environmental, we have CEO Ellen McGregor and Kyle Emery, President of Business Development. We also have the Honorable Lisa Raitt, MP of Milton and Deputy Leader for the Official Opposition. The Honorable Peter Kent, MP of Thornhill. The Honorable Tony Clement, MP of Parry Sound and Muskoka. And Dean Allison, the MP of Niagara West. Now, we know that we also have many city councilors here today, but the mayor, during her speech, will obviously introduce and recognize them. At this point, what I would also like to do, not one by one, but as a group, I would like to ask any of my colleagues, the 2018 Board of Directors, if they can please stand up and be recognized. Now we got Susan, Linda. Now, if we have forgotten anyone, I apologize. Please come see myself, Dave, or any one of the other MBOT staff, and we'll make sure we recognize you before the day's out. So, today's event provides an opportunity for the Board of Trade members and members of our community to hear firsthand from the Honorable Andrew Scheer, Leader of the Official Opposition and Leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, about his positive conservative vision for our country and his passion for politics and the future of Canada. The address will be followed by an engaging Q&A where Mr. Scheer will answer some of your questions. Now, you've noticed that you've got pads of paper and pen at your tables. We will not have mics at the end, so if you would like to have an opportunity to have your question asked, please write down your name, your email address, and your question, and the staff will make sure that we go around and pick up all of the papers so we can have the questions ready for the Q&A portion. So at this point, to provide a welcome from the city, I would like to call up upon Her Worship, Mary Bonnie Crombie.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year. I think I've landed here at the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada Annual Convention. Anyways, it's a Conservative Party, I'm sorry. Anyways, you know what I mean. On behalf of the City of Mississauga and the members of my council, it gives me great pleasure to be here and to welcome, let's give a big Mississauga welcome to the Leader of the Opposition, Andrew Scheer. Let's do it. Woo! You see, that's how it's done in Mississauga. All right. I also want to acknowledge my council colleagues that are in the audience. If they could stand, please, as well. The councillor for Ward 6, Ron Starr. I think I saw Ron over here. There he is. And councillor for Ward 10, Sue McFadden. Karen's not here, right? Karen Rast isn't here. And there are a few people, even though the head table was acknowledged, there are a few people in the room that took the early retirement package, like I did. So I want to acknowledge them too, because they're my friends. Stella Ambler is in the room. Brad Butt, who's now at the Mississauga Board of Trade. There he is over there. Bob Deckert's in the room. Bob. Yes. Terrence Young is in the room. There he is. And Bal Gosso. Good friends. So, Mr. Leader, it's my opportunity now to bring you up to speed on this great city that's called Mississauga. And looking back, you know, we have a lot to be proud of because we've accomplished a lot. We're reshaping Mississauga into a different kind of vision. We're a leading urban, world-class city. We're vibrant, inclusive, and we're a net importer of jobs. Gone are the days when Mississauga's that sleepy bedroom community, the community that is that was the bedroom community for our neighbor to the southeast Toronto. We're the ones expecting 300,000 people and creating 150,000 new jobs in the next decade. We're now a city of almost 1 million people, 800,000. We have 88,000 businesses, 73 Fortune 500 companies, and 1,400 multinationals. We are a net importer of jobs. That means more people start and end their day or drive into Mississauga than actually drive out to work. So we want to be that leading edge city, and I think we are. Thank you. We are building a livable, walkable city comparable to none. We really are that complete city now, not that bedroom community. And we're reinventing ourselves. We're investing into transit so people can take public transit and give people options so they can leave their car at home. We're reshaping our communities to be livable, walkable. We're investing in our environment. We're protecting our environment. And we're investing in new technologies to make us a smart city, a smarter city, because we're already a smart city. And we're connecting our businesses with our residents. And there's a real buzz about our city when you look at the media. The media attention we get is always, well, it's mostly positive, but generally neutral, but I think it's always positive because anytime they talk about Mississauga, it's a great thing. There's a lot of building and development going on. We're very excited that we're breaking ground on light rail transit next year along our Huron-Ontario corridor. It will become the north-south spine of regionally integrated transit. We've just completed a bus rapid transit way, 18 kilometers. The LRT will be 20 kilometers, 22 stops, and it's led to a lot of investment and a lot of growth, particularly in the south. We're rebuilding on the former power plant, Lakeview. There are 300 acres of waterfront. Where in the world, do I ask you, do you have 300 acres of waterfront that's being revisioned and recreated? Communities of Lakeview and the West Village. So we're very excited about that. But there's changes all along here, Ontario, and then in our downtown corridor as well. In the next 5 years, we have 22 towers breaking ground. It will forever change the landscape of the GTA once we're finished. You've heard about M-City. You know our beautiful Marilyn Monroe towers. They're iconic. They've changed the GTA. And when M-City goes up, we will have on one end of our downtown Maryland, and the other end, the M-City buildings. They will twist as well, but they will be square, not round. So we're very, very excited. So what I'm asking you here today is to be a committed partner. We need committed partners at all levels of government. Municipal government, particularly in Mississauga, we work well with our other levels of government, provincially and federally. We would want, should you become Prime Minister, to be a committed partner as well. And I'll just point out that there are 6 ridings in Mississauga, 5 in Brampton. So I think your success, the road to success, goes through Peel. So just keep that in mind. So there are a lot of exciting opportunities ahead for us, and we're very looking forward to what you have to say and what you will do to continue to invest in our cities, particularly because we all know they're the engines of our economy. So it's always a pleasure to have you here in Mississauga, and I know you have some Mississauga roots, so perhaps you'll talk about those as well. Pleasure to be with you, and our best wishes always. Welcome again to Mississauga.
Well, thank you, Mayor. It's always a pleasure to have you attend our events and provide us an update on our wonderful city. At this point, I want to formally introduce our keynote speaker for today. Please join me in welcoming a former chair herself of the Mississauga Board of Directors and today's event sponsor, Ellen McGregor, CEO of Fielding Environmental.
Wow, it's great to see a packed room today. A sold-out event, I understand. Is that right, David? That is right. Corporate Mississauga is at its finest, and it's in the room. Our sponsorship of this event signals our support of the Mississauga Board of Trade. Thank you, MBOT. Thank you for your leadership to host events like today so that members and guests can hear from government leaders. Thank you, Mr. Scheer. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us to share your perspectives. In the spirit of connecting, in the spirit of learning, Fielding is proud to be an event sponsor. And Fielding is also proud of being Canada's first chemical recycling company. We turn chemical waste product into new products and distribute them around the world. And in so doing, we keep those wastes out of your soils, out of lakes, and out of the air. We've been doing that since 1955, and for most of that time, right here in the city of Mississauga. Now, David and Sonia said I had 2 minutes to talk about Fielding, and instead of doing that, let me share a few hindsights that Fielding has noted over 63 years in business. In 1955, we bought products manufactured in Canada, and we paid for those products in Canadian dollars. Today, we buy the same types of products from other countries, and we pay for them in US dollars. Hindsight shows that business will move to countries that have an open for business culture and accessible, affordable talent. In 1955, we had no trouble hiring talent for our company. Today, we cannot find the skills we need. It's not a wage problem. It's a supply issue. There is a global race for talent, especially in engineering, sciences, and IT, and Canada is in that race. Hindsight shows that the talent we educate here will leave Canada for the promise of economic opportunities elsewhere. And in 1955, taxation was relatively transparent and affordable. But over time, municipal, provincial, federal governments have raised taxes and added new ones, combined with increases to wages and benefits. This layering of financial burdens puts at jeopardy the success, the survival of SMEs, the backbone of our economy. As a mature clean tech company, Fielding has been able to survive these changes. But sadly, we see younger companies in the clean tech, the innovation space, not able to do the same. Suffice it to say that, like many of you in this room today, we have seen tremendous changes over the years. It's tougher to run a profitable business in Canada than ever before. And we are interested in hearing from all government leaders on how hindsights like those I've shared today will be reflected in policy and actions going forward. How will they create, as Mississauga has done so well, an open for business culture in this country? I know I speak for us all when I say we're eager to hear from our esteemed guest. And it is my privilege to introduce him right now. We're delighted to have with us today the Honorable Andrew Scheer, Leader of the Opposition and Leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. He was first elected Member of Parliament for Regina Capel in 2004 by defeating the longest-serving member of the House of Commons. Re-elected 4 times, he held the position of Speaker of the House from 2011 to 2015, becoming the youngest Speaker in Canadian history. After the 2015 election, Andrew served as the official opposition House Leader before successfully seeking the Conservative leadership. Andrew studied history and politics at the universities of Ottawa and Regina, and he passed the Canadian Accredited Insurance Broker Program and began his working career in the insurance industry in Regina. He's a father of 5 and has been known all his life for being true to his conservative principles in politics and out. He is here today to provide us with the vision for the future of Canada, a perspective I know that we're all interested in hearing. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Honourable Andrew Scheer.
Well, thank you very much, Ellen, for that very, very upbeat and passionate introduction, and also for your very meaningful words on some of the challenges facing not just your company, but many companies throughout Canada in many, many different sectors. So thank you for that. I took notes. I may be working some of that into my speech at later events. That was very, very good. Your Worship, Bonnie, thank you very much for your welcome as well. I was worried she might scoop the fact that I do have very deep Mississauga roots. My mom, the Enright family, grew up on Cawthra Road, just south of the QEW. Yes, yeah. And right across from the pool and the high school there, lots of fond memories going down to the lake shore. My aunts and uncles are all spread throughout various parts of Mississauga. I'm not sure with all the redistributions of which riding they're in, but near Clarkson GO Transit Station and Port Credit Station. So lots of fond memories taking the GO train into Blue Jays games and the X when I came here in the summer as a kid. My parents moved to Ottawa after they got married. I grew up in Ottawa, and every summer from the time I was about maybe 6 or 7 years old, they would pack me and my 2 sisters up and send us off to Grandma and Grandpa's house. And I thought this was this wonderful thing that they were doing for us. I didn't realize at the time, in retrospect, they were just getting themselves 3 weeks of holidays without the kids every summer. So we would come, and my aunts and uncles would spoil us. They would take us to, like I said, the X and Blue Jays games and all kind of Canada's Wonderland many, many times. And I have very fond memories of going to Square One, taking the number 8 from Cawthra Road to Square One for movies and things like that. Yeah. See, I know. Is that route still there? I don't know if it's, yeah, okay, there we are. Fantastic. So it's always a great pleasure to be back here. I really do enjoy this part of the GTA. I think it's, and the difference, holy smokes, to come here now. Throughout the leadership race, I came here several times, and it was hard to recognize some of it because having moved to Saskatchewan for a number of years after I graduated the university, coming back, it was remarkable how quickly so much of this area has grown and developed, and it's great to see, and it's an example of the pride and the confidence that people have in their community. So thank you to all of you who have had a hand in that. I know these types of things don't happen by accident. They happen because entrepreneurs take risks and visionaries decide to put everything they have behind an idea or a product or a service, and they grow a business and they grow a community along with it. So thank you for all of you for your service to your community as well. So this is my first public event since Christmas. We had a great opportunity to just kind of gear down over the holidays. We went back to Regina, spent 2 weeks at home. We had plans to do a lot of tobogganing and skating and things like that, but it was minus 30 for about 10 days, and I didn't have the heart to send my kids out there in that kind of weather. If I wasn't prepared to go out, I wasn't going to make them do it either. As Ellen mentioned, I do have 5 kids, so Christmas is pretty busy, and a lot of people will ask me, how do you do it? You know, it's hard enough being in public life. It's hard enough being in public life with a family, but then to take on a leadership position like this with such a large family, it must be very difficult. It's 5 kids. You know, how do you do it with 5 kids? And I was watching a Netflix comedy special. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Jim Gaffigan, but he had the greatest answer I've ever seen for what it's like to deal with and cope with being a parent of 5 children. He was asked the very same question, you know, what's it like to have your 5th child? And his answer was, well, imagine yourself drowning and then someone throws you a baby. Could not have put it better. myself. But, you know, we have had a lot of work over the past few months as a Conservative caucus. And first and foremost, let me also thank the Mississauga Board of Trade, chambers of commerce across the country, boards of trade across the country, professional groups, industry associations, small business owners, all of you together helped push back against one of the most egregious attacks on job creators our country has ever seen. Thank you for all of your hard work. We probably can all remember back to the middle of the summer when we probably making plans for the fall. Maybe businesses were starting to think about hiring strategies or marketing strategies for the fall quarter, and then all of a sudden the government decided to throw a monkey wrench into everyone's plans to grow and expand their businesses and provide new opportunities for the places they live in. Of course, I'm talking about on July 18th when Finance Minister Bill Morneau and Justin Trudeau decided to make life a little bit harder. I shouldn't say a little bit harder, a lot harder for all of us in this room, for all of you in this room who take that risk and put everything they have into a business. And why did they do that? Well, if you find out and tell me, maybe then we'll both know. It's still hard to figure out why exactly they decided at this point in time to do the types of things that they proposed. And it was great to watch the boards of trades, the chambers of commerce all come together and work together and share information, and my caucus colleagues, all of us going home on the weekends, having town halls, meeting with constituents, people who were worried, people who weren't worried about making less money that year, people who weren't worried about having maybe to forego the luxuries of life. These were people who were worried about being able to keep the staff they had. There were people who were worried about whether or not they were going to be able to open up that second location and provide opportunities for perhaps dozens of people. They were worried for their ability to maintain the opportunities that they had already created. And that was why our caucus, your Conservative members of Parliament, were so passionate about pushing back against these policies. And as we go back and look, you know, I can think about every time you know, we were very successful. We got them to walk back a great deal of what they were proposing. We're not out of the woods yet, and we know some new ones came into effect January 1st. And I got to tell you, just as an aside, to have a government of Canada table drop in the very last few days of the House of Commons significant new tax regulations for Canadian entrepreneurs without any time for the official opposition to ask questions, to hold the government to account, to quietly do it 2 or 3 weeks before they came into effect. That is not a way to run an economy. It's not a way to run a country. It's not a way to treat all those entrepreneurs who invest in their communities and believe in this country. But all of us working together were able to push back and force the government to climb down from many of their policies. Now, I have to tell you that very quickly throughout the fall, it became apparent to me that the most popular Liberal announcements was when Justin Trudeau was announcing, you know, the biggest rounds of applause he got, the biggest thumbs up he got from people across Canada, was when he was announcing that he was reversing one of his previous announcements. Those were the ones he really hit out of the park. Those are the ones he nailed. But I get so passionate about this particular issue because I benefited from small business owners my entire life. I grew up in a very middle-class family. My dad worked at the Ottawa Citizen. My mom worked at CHEO, the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. She was a nurse. My dad was a librarian at the newspaper. He's got a post-media pension, so all of us in the room, I hope you're subscribing to one of those papers. Doesn't matter which one. Don't have to read it, just subscribe to it. And they were very generous. They were very gracious. They always tried to make sure that my sisters and I had the types of things that we needed to grow and see. But there weren't a heck of a lot of luxuries. We didn't own a car. So, you know, not only did I take the number 8 to get to Square One in Mississauga, but I took the bus everywhere I needed to go in Ottawa as well. And if you think it's easy to get a girl to meet you at the Transitway station in January, you have to develop a very, very good pitch. So I like to think that's what honed my ability to persuade people in life. But I get so passionate about it because not only did I benefit from those jobs, it helped me pay my way through school. I worked as a waiter in a restaurant, and every time that business did well, I had better opportunity. You know, Ellen, you talked about the effect on small and medium-sized enterprises, but it goes far beyond that. You know, there are 1.4 million small business owners in Canada, but there are millions more who work at those small businesses. And that's what this fight was about. It wasn't just about that part of our economy. It's the benefits that are created all throughout. And that's what the Liberal government just does not understand at any level here in Ontario or federally either. It is always the case that the very people that the Liberals claim they want to help are hurt the most by the very policies that Liberals themselves introduce. That is something that Conservatives are pushing back very hard on as well. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. There are a lot of troubling signs coming along the way. There are a lot of storm clouds that are gathering, and I'm concerned about it a lot. For the past 2 years, the Trudeau Liberals have been pursuing policies that put our future at grave risk. They're spending everything today, leaving future generations to pay far higher taxes. The Nonpartisan Parliamentary Budget Office released their latest report on Canada's finances at the end of October. And the report shows that the federal budget won't be balanced by the end of this Liberal mandate like they promised. Deficits will continue into the foreseeable future. And that is a choice by the Liberal government. They do not need to spend more than they take in. There's no compelling reason for it, like a recession or a war, but they have chosen to do so. And these storm clouds are gathering more and more. I don't believe that any of the positive signs that have been happening in the economy are thanks to anything the Liberals have been doing. I think it's thanks to the hard work of Canadians all across the country, and it's happening despite the policies of the federal Liberal government. Promised funding for infrastructure has been slow to move, and all of the new tax hikes on businesses and individuals won't help. And with the threat of interest rates going up, Canadians will pay more on the record amount of debt that they already owe, and so will the government. These tax hikes are a consequence of Justin Trudeau's decision to spend. We all know as Conservatives that if you borrow money, you have to pay it back somehow, someday. Tax hikes like the payroll taxes going up, national carbon taxes being imposed on every province, tax-free savings accounts being slashed, and many popular tax credits being eliminated. They even wanted to tax employee discounts and Canadians with diabetes. And that's something that our Conservative caucus in the House of Commons, we worked so hard. Every other week, it seemed, they had a new proposal to either eliminate a tax credit that was helping some of Canada's most vulnerable or finding a new way to impose a tax on Canadians. I remember when they threatened to tax employee discounts. I didn't know this. When I was a waiter, I didn't realize that every time I got a 50% discount on my meal that I was somehow cheating on my taxes by not claiming that. And we've had to force it to walk them back on so many of those. And it just shows the mean-spirited approach that the finance department has when it comes to the money that Canadians earn after working so hard. Justin Trudeau said they wanted to help the middle class, but their policies do the opposite. The Fraser Institute has shown that 81% of middle-income families pay higher taxes today, with the average increase at around $840 per year. Now, there's nothing compassionate about this. Trudeau said the wealthy would pay more and the middle class would get a break. It certainly hasn't worked out that way at all. The entire time that they were going after small businesses, they used very divisive and very inflammatory rhetoric. They accused many hardworking business owners as just trying to avoid paying higher taxes. They said that many of these types of arrangements were not about creating jobs. They were just fancy accounting schemes to lower tax burdens. And they persecuted and made life difficult and continue to do that for the mechanics, the shop owners, the interior designers, the plumbers, the people who put up a shingle and try to support their families. But they weren't entirely wrong about everything. You know, it does turn out that Justin Trudeau was right about something. There were some people who were using fancy accounting schemes and special types of arrangements. It just turns out that if Justin Trudeau and Bill Morneau wanted to find those people, all they had to do was turn slightly towards each other, gaze into each other's eyes, and they could have left the rest of the hardworking Canadians in this country who just believe in their communities and want to leave something better for their families alone for the past 6 months. It's not just domestically here at home. There are external threats that concern me as well. Now, negotiations are still underway for the future of NAFTA. There's a lot of reasons to be concerned, a lot of signs that they're not going as well as they could be. Now, I announced earlier this week that I will be taking a delegation of Conservative members of Parliament down to Washington with me to speak with a united voice. I do believe it's very important that when opposition parties go down to Washington, that we all bring the Canadian flag down with us and fight for the common good for our economy. That is really a non-partisan issue. So we will be doing that. But here at home, we will be holding this Liberal government to account as to whether or not they've been taking this as seriously as they should have been, as early as they should have been. Take, for example, softwood lumber. It's an issue that's very important to the Canadian economy. And when President Obama was still in the White House, there was a possibility to get a deal before the new administration came in. And when Justin Trudeau went down to Washington for that very celebrated, much hyped state dinner, he didn't take his Minister of Natural Resources down with him. He took his in-laws and the chief party fundraiser for the Liberal Party, but he didn't take down some of the most senior ministers who may have been able to get the ball over the finish line on that very important issue. Justin Trudeau doesn't seem to have a plan. The United States is making very serious demands of Canada, and these protectionist demands threaten our auto sector, for example, and much of our supply chain in many different types of manufacturing sectors. He's put forward a small number of priorities in comparison to the United States putting forward over 100 demands at the table, so that we know that the collapse of NAFTA will be devastating for Canadian workers, for businesses, and the families that depend on them. And I don't know that Justin Trudeau is prepared to this. As he faces the threat of failure in these talks, the reason why I'm not all that optimistic is because of what happened at other trade negotiations just recently. For the Trans-Pacific Partnership, our Prime Minister, in the very final hours, completely no-showed the final signing portion of those talks, just no-showed it. He's managed to anger some of our closest allies and friends. I mean, how do you get, as Prime Minister of Canada, how do you get Japan and Australia mad at you? Only Justin Trudeau could have figured that out. He went to China. He went to China with great expectations. You know, this was going to be a new era for trade, taking Canada down a road that many of us have concerns about. But he couldn't even do it. In fact, he couldn't even negotiate the photo op with the Chinese government, never mind the talks. And this is the guy that's sitting down at the table with Donald Trump. So we have a lot of concerns on our side about the ability for Justin Trudeau to actually protect a deal. Of course, there's all kinds of stuff that we have grave concern. Peter Kent is he's our shadow. Recently, he's been one of the more busier shadow ministers in our guys. He is the shadow minister for ethics, and I should just maybe proactively disclose this to you, Peter. Recently, I too flew into an island airport. It was Billy Bishop. It wasn't anything in the Caribbean, so I think that's okay. But I just want to flag that with you, because I don't believe that getting caught by the ethics commissioner breaking federal ethics law is something to celebrate. And the Prime Minister's answers recently at the town hall, where he seemed to say that this is a wonderful sign that our system works. I'm no lawyer, but if someone ever pled that in a court of law, I don't know what the judge would say to that. But Conservatives do have a positive vision. We are excited to put forward a set of policies that will reinforce the very best of our Canadian spirit and our history. We know that success is contagious. You don't need to pit one group of Canadians against another. The best way the government can help stimulate the economy is to allow those who are already doing that, already succeeding that, to do it better, to simply get out of the way. We don't need to create losers in order to create winners. We can all succeed together. And in that prospering, we all do prosper together. Our quality of life goes up collectively. It's not a zero-sum game. If the growth in our economy over the past 40 years, over the past 50 years, over the course of our history hasn't come because government planned it that way. It's the free people making free decisions every day, trying to provide a better product or a better service. That's what creates real growth, and that's what improves the quality of life for all Canadians. Take, for example, a luxury item that we all have in our home, say, televisions. In the 1970s, the top-of-the-line model would cost the average worker about 2 weeks' worth of salary to be able to save up to buy a television. That's if they didn't spend anything on taxes, on food, or anything else. That same top-of-the-line model today is infinitely better. It's much better. You know, back when I was a kid, I was the remote, and that was the smart TV back then, was just having enough kids that you could, you know, go change the channel for you. So that product is infinitely better today. It costs the average worker today 2 days' salary to save up for that television today in comparison. That is a real tangible increase of the quality of life for Canadians. Someone who doesn't have to work as hard as long to save up for a luxury item has the ability to spend more on other things, whether it's saving for a child's education or for other items that they may wish to buy. That didn't happen because there was a minister of TV fairness that decided one day that we were going to focus all our resources into innovation and improving that. It didn't. There wasn't a white paper that called for you know, a cluster of excellence somewhere in Canada to work on these things. It happened organically. It happened because every day when people go out who take that risk, trying to provide a better service or better product and do so, we all benefit in that together. So that's the conservative message I want to leave you with today. Over the next few months, we'll be putting forward specific policies that always speak to ensuring that Canadians can prosper, not in spite of government, but with government being that partner in success, believing in the ability of Canadians to innovate and grow together. That's the conservative message that we know always works in Canada, and it is a stark contrast between the Ottawa Knows Best top-down approach by the Liberal government that always ends up hurting people more than it helps. What's more compassionate for a young person today? A conservative government that's always looking to reduce barriers to investment, that wants to make it easier for a small business owner to hire and expand, open up a second location? Or a Liberal government that's making it harder to succeed, that's chasing away investment, that's forcing that business owner to look at alternatives to hiring people in their own cities and towns? The answer is clear. We always do better when we have those fundamental conservative principles in operation at the federal level, and I am committed to bringing that positive message across the country, and I ask for your support to help me get that message out so that we can bring back a little bit of fiscal sanity to the federal government that is so sorely lacking these days. So thank you very much for allowing me to come and say a few words with you. Which side do you want me on?
I'm going to put you on this side. The microphone's on that side. And they're going to move this stuff out.
Okay.
You see, the questions are coming in fast and furious. So while we get a few in here, Andrew, I'm from Burlington. And
Ticats or Argonauts? Burlington's like on that.
Well, I'm a Toronto boy, so
Okay.
I have to go with the Argos.
All right.
And your deputy leader's from Burlington area, looks after Burlington area. Every one of my neighbors want to know, what is she really like to work with? No, you're not allowed to answer the question, Lisa.
Well, that's an easy question. It's fantastic.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Good answer.
No, if I could say, I mean, I've got a great team. I really am blessed with a great caucus all across Canada where we hold seats in every aspect of the field. Lisa and I got to know each other quite well when I was House Leader, and she was Finance Shadow Minister. We worked a lot together. We developed, we realized we had a very similar sense of humor. And a lot of times we would be heckling, not to get under the skin of the Liberals or to throw them off the game, but just to make each other laugh. And that continued throughout the leadership race. And I'm so lucky to have her. She's taking on this role as Deputy Leader. She brings a great passion. She comes from a very, I think, typical Canadian upbringing herself, coming from Cape Breton, knowing the struggles that a lot of families face when economic opportunities aren't there in their community, and she brings that passion everywhere she goes. Likewise, all my colleagues come from a walk of life that allows them to bring that passion and channel it into the House of Commons. And I got to tell you, I believe this very firmly. I think most people would agree when you look at the analysts and those that follow. We've got a front bench that could step into government tomorrow morning. They are ready. They are capable.
So let's talk about NAFTA. We know that the negotiations have not been going well, and it's in political life. It's easy to throw stones at the government that's in power. What we don't hear often enough is, what would you do if you were there at the negotiating table? So what would you do differently? What could you do differently? Or is it all in the hands of the United States negotiators?
Well, look, I think that there's no question that this particular administration poses a unique threat to NAFTA at this particular period of time. But let's go back a little bit and think about the primaries, just after the primaries for both the Republicans and the Democrats. And it should have been clear to this Liberal government that the next president was going to have a more protectionist approach than previous administrations. Both the Democrat and Republican nominees, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, were using a lot of anti-NAFTA rhetoric. I believe that that was that critical time where our government should have been fanning out across the United States, not necessarily just talking to elected officials, but talking to all those businesses that depend on trade with Canada to employ Americans. The thing about free trade is that both countries benefit. We benefit equally. We can grow together. So there are a lot of companies all throughout the United States that sell into the auto supply chain, that buy inputs from Canada, that sell back into Canada. And we needed to help them make the case for free trade with Canada earlier. You know, there are signs that the government is doing that now. I believe some of that should have been done earlier, and more of it. The second thing is, when you sit down at the negotiating table, I believe a lot of it has to do with leverage. You know, you could go down and read a copy of Adam Smith to Donald Trump, and you know, I don't know that you'd necessarily move the ball forward for Canadian interests. But when you go down the table and you have people in the U.S. wanting to do business in Canada, that helps your position. And I got to tell you, when this government puts in new hurdles to investment, when it creates massive new bureaucracies and red tapes around energy development, around expansion, when they send the signal like they have to small businesses that you will face punitive taxation rates, to me, I believe that makes it much harder to make the case for Canada. And so those voices in the American economy saying, hey, we want to get into Canada, we want to invest in Canada, we want to open up an office there, we want to be able to, all of that gets diminished because we are a less attractive country to invest in because of government policies. And that's a big part of it as well. So a lot of these things can't be looked at in isolation. It's not just about words on a briefing note at a negotiation table. It's all these other things happening in context as well.
Let's switch over to the legalization of cannabis. Recently, the municipalities have asked for more money from the provinces, and we have supported that. We wrote a letter in support of that there will be additional costs that will have to be borne by the municipalities. And of course, in turn, the provinces are asking the federal government for more money to take care of these costs. This legislation appears that it is going to go through. It will be there. So what's your opinion of how should the trickle down of monies be handled in order so that municipalities do not have to bear the additional cost of a piece of legislation that they had no part in putting into place?
It's a very valid question, and one that we were raising the alarm bells early on, saying, I think the one thing that many people can agree, even if they hold different views on the principle of the legislation itself, that this was handled improperly. To have a date set and a political target before any kind of consultation was done with provinces, with municipalities and police forces, to me it's a completely backwards approach. If this was something the government wanted to do, they should have done all of that first, and then when that was done, proceed. It's like going into a restaurant and ordering a meal and saying, I want it out in 10 minutes no matter what, and you get a half-cooked entree because you demanded on a timeline, not on a good product. So when they first announced that they were going to keep 50% of the revenues from the excise tax, the provincial governments were rightly upset about that. The federal government, to me, has not indicated where their new costs will be for legalization. All the costs with this new regime will be downloaded onto provinces and municipalities, so the revenue should flow to those who have increased costs. If it's our police forces having to do more traffic safety checks, if it's our provincial government trying to manage the healthcare system and all that, that's where the money should be flowing to. Just to restate, I voted against it, our caucus voted against it, our party voted against it on principle. We are trying to make changes at the Senate, specifically around the minimum age of consumption. I believe 18 is far too young. The Canadian Medical Association agrees that there's a lot of brain development that goes on well into your 20s. And again, this was a very rushed thing, ignoring a lot of the advice from experts in the field.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to carbon tax, the federal government said the provinces need to come up with something, or we'll come up with something for you. Our own government in the province of Ontario has come up with their plan. Do you support a national policy on this?
I support a national effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, absolutely. And I can assure you the Conservative Party of Canada will have a compelling and comprehensive environmental proposal in the lead up to the next election campaign. But I am opposed to the top-down approach that Justin Trudeau has approached by imposing a carbon tax on the provinces. First of all, I'm glad you called it a carbon tax. Soon after he introduced it, Justin Trudeau stopped calling it a carbon tax and started calling it a price on carbon. Well, a price is something that the market sets based on supply and demand, and you as the consumer have the choice as to whether or not you want to pay it. That's a price. When the government sets it, when the government collects it, and when the government forces you to pay it, that's a tax. It's not a price.
You mentioned about the deficit, and there seems to be no regard for spending money at the federal level. How would you handle it differently? How would you still try to do the same kinds of programs that the federal government is doing now, and how would you anticipate paying for it?
Well, that's a great question. I think the essential thing for Conservatives is to explain why we're opposed to deficits. And too often, Conservatives will say, we need to balance the budget, and that's where we put the period. Mm-hmm. Or, deficits are bad, and we just think it's self-evident. I think Conservatives have to go beyond that and explain why it is that deficits are bad and why we want balanced budgets. We don't want balanced budgets because we like to see black ink on the ledger book. We want balanced budgets because we know that when you borrow money from future Canadians, that money has to be paid back with interest. We believe it's unjust. Nobody would run their own family this way. I don't plan on leaving my kids with a bunch of bills for my spending. Why would we allow a government to do that for future generations? And I think that's something I think that's a Canadian concept that unites us all, no matter what part of the country we are, whether we've been here for many generations or we've arrived in Canada more recently. This idea, how many people do we know who have come to Canada for the opportunities that we provide? They live above a store or behind a restaurant, and they scrimp and they save and they work hard, all for their kids. And that look of pride on their face when they see their son or daughter graduate and knowing that they've got tools that they would never have and doors open to them they never had, that's a principle that Conservatives reflect when they are in government, that we have the same type of responsibility for future generations. So what would I do differently? Let me tell you. The Liberals said that they were going into deficit to spend on infrastructure, and that money's not going out. Oh, sorry, they are spending on infrastructure. It's just on the Asian Infrastructure Bank spending on infrastructure projects in another part of the world, not here domestically in Canada. So there are a lot of points of difference where we think there is easy money to save that wouldn't reduce services, core services for Canadians that can help us get back to balanced budgets.
But it seems that, at least in the province of Ontario, where the government has been running deficits for quite some time, it would appear that at least Ontarians are not all that concerned about running the deficit. So how do you make a position on a balanced budget when it would seem that Canadians really don't care whether we have a balanced budget or not?
Well, I don't know that I would. It's always hard to draw conclusions from why different parties have been successful at different times. I don't believe that, in general, conservative Canadians don't care about deficits. I believe that at various times they put a greater emphasis or not on it. And I don't think that anybody is comfortable with the idea of just runaway deficits forever. We know when interest rates go up, that debt washes around like a ballast tank in a ship. And when you go into rocky seas, that can be devastating. You know, if the sailing is smooth, it doesn't matter as much. But a responsible government takes steps when times are good, so that when times are tough, they have that flexibility and can react. And I think Canadians understand that by just spending money for the sake of spending money, you reduce your ability to react in the future. But I do think that Conservatives do have a challenge, and I believe that in previous, decades ago, we won the argument on a lot of issues. We won the argument that balanced budgets were better for the economy and better for Canadians. We won the argument that free enterprise and free market decisions always are better for Canadians than government control and government intervention. We won the argument that lower taxes create more prosperity, and that the government can actually collect more in revenue when taxes are low because there's more economic activity. We won those arguments, and we thought the job was done. But clearly, the Liberals never stopped, and they have convinced more and more people that their approach is better. So I think Conservatives have to refight some of those fights that we thought we won. We might think it's self-evident that lower taxes allow for economic activity, which means that there's more opportunities for people like me when I was getting my start. We just think that's self-evident. We think, well, if we said that, it would be so obvious that it wouldn't be effective. But I think we do have to go back and start refighting some of those fundamental battle of ideas that we thought we had won 30 years ago.
One of the criticisms that I hear over and over from a business perspective is the Minister for Small Business was a new minister, given that portfolio along with another portfolio. It's considered a junior portfolio. And then on top of all of that, she was saddled with House Leader as well. That's a lot for a minister to handle at any one time. We won't talk about whether that's a signal from the current government of their position on business. What I would ask you is, how would you handle that differently, and would you give business a more of a focus?
Well, obviously I would want my Minister of Small Business to have the ability to be an advocate for small businesses. I think one of the things that was so disappointing watching the government approach on this is that it became clear very early on that the Minister for Small Business was not fighting to make sure that these fiscal reforms were modified or abandoned or scrapped away. It was the obvious. She was selling the government's message on these tax reforms and trying to convince businesses that it was good for them. And I would take a completely different approach. I believe your minister should be around the cabinet table to be a voice for that part of our economy. The Minister of Veterans Affairs should be advocating for veterans. The Minister for Small Businesses should be coming to that cabinet table every day saying, here's what will help small businesses grow. This was the exact opposite approach. To me, it seems like these ministers across the spectrum are there to go out and convince their stakeholders of the Liberal policies instead of the other way around.
Some people wanted to get to know you a little bit better, personally. You have 5 children.
Yes.
Name them from oldest to youngest, quickly.
Thomas, Grace, Madeline, Henry, Mary.
Your wife's birthday?
December 4th.
Ooh, that's good.
You have no way of fact-checking that, by the way. That's December 4th. 2 of my kids were born on the same day to reduce the number of birthdays I had to memorize.
That's a well-thought-out plan. I'd like to know how you managed that one. What was your fondest memory of being in Mississauga?
Oh, wow. So my grandparents lived on Coffin Road before it was developed, and their property, they had one of those old kind of rural long lots, and it went all the way back to the creek. And there was this a crabapple tree kind of halfway back in their yard. And my cousin, I have a lot of cousins. I have, I think, 27, 28 cousins, big Irish Catholic family. And we used to have crabapple wars. We'd honestly, like, someone would be on one side of the tree, and we would just be hurling these things. And inevitably, someone would be running inside crying to grandma because they had a big welt on their face every single time. It was a lot of fun.
Final serious question for you. If you could pick one issue that you would take to the Canadian public in advance of the next election, what would it be?
Wow, it's so hard to pick one because I think so. No, but it's true because so many of these things go in together, and it's hard to say what's more important. Obviously, the economy is important, and trying to create prosperity and making sure that our future generations have the same things we have is critically important. But so too is security. You know, when I see this government have a very laissez-faire attitude towards serious things, like people who have returned from Syria, who have fought with ISIS, who come back to Canada, that is a huge issue. And when when Justin Trudeau sloughs it off and shrugs it off and acts like we can teach them how to write poetry and save them, not only, I mean, it's offensive. And when he tries to paint anybody who has a legitimate question about this as being Islamophobic, it's not only an insult to people who have those concerns, it's also a grave insult to the Muslim community in Canada who are just as concerned about their faith and their religion being twisted and distorted and used to justify these types of language. It's something that unites Muslim Canadians as well, along with everyone else. We need to take people who take up arms against our country, against our allies. We need to take that seriously to protect all Canadians, regardless of their faith and regardless of their
Well, I'm glad you had a great answer to that question, because the only other question I had was boxers or briefs, and we didn't want to get to that one. So,
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Scheer.
Thanks very much. Thank you.